Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Noem, thank you for being here. I'm really glad that a lot of my Republican colleagues talked about the disaster that Biden and Mayorkas, your predecessor, created. It was absurd. You heard the things from Senator Brett, people that came over here who themselves were traumatized by the very people who then come to this country and traumatize American citizens. You heard Senator Schmidt saying the same thing. A lot of us are very frustrated with the disaster that President Biden left behind and a failed DHS. It's why I'm angry, and it's why I've been critical of you, Secretary Noem, because we're missing an opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the reasons President Trump won a year and a half ago is because people were sick and tired of a Democratic administration's open border policy and allowing millions of people to come to this country, 1.7 million called gotaways. We don't even know where they are, but we know when you pay a premium to a cartel to get them into this country, they're bad people. Now, why have I been critical of Secretary Noem? Because I don't think we're focusing on, we have limited resources. ICE can't be everywhere at once. There's very few people in Capitol Hill that support law enforcement more than me, including the sworn ICE officers. In fact, I've just been told, fortunately, in about a week and a half, we're going to get a plaque on the wall over the Capitol, thanking the Capitol police officers and all the agencies that responded on January 6th. All those thugs have actually been pardoned, and yet we haven't thanked the Capitol police officers for their work here. So when I say I'm unapologetically pro-law enforcement, you can count in every single sworn officer in Homeland Security. So why am I disappointed with Secretary Noem? Because we're not going after enough people who did this damage at the expense of running numbers that Stephen Miller wants out of the White House. We just want numbers. We want 1,000 a day, 6,000 a day, 9,000 a day because numbers matter, right? No, they don't matter. Quality matters, not quantity. Quality. And what we've seen is a disaster. Under your leadership, Ms. Noem, a disaster. What we've seen is innocent people getting detained that turn out are American citizens. I could talk about the culture that's been created here with Stephen Miller aiding and abetting. I heard first reports that he was the one that said it was a domestic terrorist situation where 2 people lost their lives in Minneapolis. I've heard that report. Maybe you can refute it. I don't know that we'll have time for you to respond because I'm giving you a performance evaluation here. I'm not looking for a response. And I'm saying, Ms. Noem, that time after time after time I've been disappointed. But before I get back to looking at the vicious people that did this damage to these families, I want to talk a minute about FEMA. You have a policy right now that anything over $100,000 has to go through your desk for approval. I asked my staff, because I'm a management consultant, I don't try to do cheap shots in here, but the facts do not lie. This is your administration for FEMA response. This is President Trump's first administration. Which one would you like to have? If you're a state that has a $60 billion disaster, your biggest disaster in South Dakota that I can tell that when you were an elected official was about $500 million. So 1/100th of this single storm where thousands of people are hurting in North Carolina and you're just barely catching up. This is what competent FEMA leadership looks like. This is what incompetent FEMA leadership looks like. And people are hurting in Western North Carolina from the most significant storm they've ever experienced. This is what we need more of. I'm convinced you can't do it. If you're requesting a review of $100,000 and up, then it begs the question, why? Why would you be involved in that? Why would that be a policy? And in a minute, I'll ask about some people that are involved, some special government employees. Why are they involved in it? Thank you.
Senator,
no,
that $100,000 only had to do.
And I will hold the clock until I finish.
Okay.
The bottom line is I've done the analysis. And you can say whatever you want to. I've worked with the Democrat governor. I've worked with the Republican governor. I've worked with fiscal research. We have people contacting my office now to get the information to better understand the failure of this department. You failed at FEMA. And in fact, if I get to it, actually, why don't I cover this right now? The Homeland Security Act of 2002 expressly prohibits the Secretary of Homeland Security from restricting or diverting FEMA resources from the agency's mission. based on your disaster response, the chart that I just showed you, I have reason to believe that you're violating the law, either knowingly or unknowingly. So I'll be asking and getting a submission to the record, submitting a question for the record, what the total amount of FEMA reimbursements are currently being held by DHS, awaiting for final approval. Held by DHS, awaiting for final approval for an agency that you should not be obstructing the disbursement on. I'm going to give you time to answer to it under penalty of perjury so that we can get it right. Now, going back to Minneapolis, why can't we just say we made a mistake? I will ask you one question, if you can just give me a quick response. Who does Tom Holman work for? You or the president?
The president.
Okay. Why is that? Because I believe the president recognized that you weren't getting it done in Minneapolis, and you're putting us further away from pointing to this. We're beginning to get the American people to think that deporting people is wrong. It's the exact opposite. The way you're going about deporting them is wrong. The fact that you can't admit to a mistake, which looks like under investigation, is going to prove that Ms. Good and Mr. Petty probably should not have been shot in the face and in the back. Law enforcement needs to learn from that. You don't protect them by not looking after the facts. Not only should the FBI be investigating it, but every single law enforcement agency in that jurisdiction should be invited to it, so our law enforcement officers do not have this pall cast upon them. One of the reasons why ICE officers are having threats, and damn the people that threaten ICE officers, because so many of them are doing a good job, is because you've cast a pall on them by acting like we should investigate things differently. Officer-involved shootings have a formula that we should go through every time. And we're not going through that formula. As a matter of fact, in Ms. Good's case, I think that they were even saying that maybe there wasn't even a need to do it in the DOJ. I hope that that's changed. But I'm telling you, it was a civil rights review. I saw your frown. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But originally, Blanche said there wouldn't be an investigation. Folks, law enforcement, we've got to have their back. We've got to make it clear when they make a mistake, then they get corrected for it. But you don't walk away from it, and you've done it too many times. Now, Secretary, I read your book last week. And honestly, some of the parts of it impressed me, but some of it distresses me. And I'll give you a good example of one that does. The passage where you talk about killing a dog that was 14 months old. I train dogs, all right? And you are a farmer. You should know better. You should know that if you're going out to a hunting lodge and you're putting pheasants out and you're putting dogs out, you don't take a puppy out there. A 14-month-old dog is basically a teenager in dog years. You decided to kill that dog because you had not invested the appropriate time in training, and then you have the audacity to go into a book and say it's a leadership lesson about tough choices. It's in your book. We could play it if we had time. At that same lunch hour, you killed a goat. And you killed the goat because you said it was behaving badly. You are a farmer. You don't castrate a goat. They behave badly. You should have probably done that before. But my point is, those are bad decisions made in the heat of the moment, not unlike what happened up in Minneapolis. I expect we're an exceptional nation. And one of the reasons we're exceptional is we expect exceptional leadership. And you've demonstrated anything but that in the time that I've seen you responding to the emergency in North Carolina and across the Southeast, and acknowledging when mistakes are made, and speaking too soon for the expedient of social media or whatever it is. I'll leave you with this, Ms. Noem. I'm expecting answers to Charlotte's Web. I requested it a month ago. That was one of the investigations in Charlotte, 20 minutes from where I live. All I asked for, if it had to be anonymized, was information so that I could determine if your hit rate is right. I want to find more of those people, and I want to detain fewer of the others. And Mr. Chair, in my remaining time, I have a lot to go. But I want to submit this letter from the Office of Inspector General that cites 10 different instances under Ms. Noem's leadership where they've been misled and not allowed to pursue investigations that they think are critically important. Does anybody have any idea how bad it has to be for the OIG in this agency to come out and do this publicly? That is stonewalling, that's a failure of leadership, and that is why I've called for your resignation. And if I don't get an answer to these questions, I don't want an applause. Please don't do that for me. If I don't get an answer to these questions, if I don't get an answer that you've had a month to respond to, and the remaining ones, as of today, I'll be informing leadership that I'm putting a hold on any en bloc nominations until I get a response. And in 2 weeks, if I don't get a response, I'm going to deny quorum and markup in as many committees as I can until I get a response. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Now it's Senator Booker's turn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Noem, you're in charge of your agency. The buck stops with you, correct?
I'm in charge of my agency, what?
The buck stops with you,
Yes,
correct?
correct.
And you had to swear an oath to the Constitution before you took this job, right?
Correct.
So one of the most sacrosanct ideals of our nation, enshrined in our Constitution, is freedom, is liberty. Mm-hmm. It is an idea that the government has a very high standard should they take away liberty and freedom from an American citizen. How many U.S. citizens has DHS detained as of last October?
Senator, if you're talking about detained and arrested, is that those that have been violating and obstructing our law enforcement operations? Is that what you're referencing? Because it could be hundreds and hundreds. We have faced violent riots across the country,
You are
specifically
saying that
in Portland and in
the only
Minneapolis.
people you've detained are committing crimes, but you and I both know
No,
that's
I
not
haven't
true.
said that. I didn't
So
say
then
that. I
how
asked
many
which ones you were
people
referencing.
have you detained?
I can't give you an accurate number because we've literally detained and arrested many for those obstruction of law enforcement operations, and
So
also
public
others
records,
that had probable
let me tell you what
cause
my staff researched.
and then released
May
once
I,
they're-
may I
yes.
continue? Public records are showing that over 170 incidents of your agency unlawfully taking away the liberties and freedoms of American citizens. This includes 20 children, 20 American kids that your agency detained. How long can your agency detain an American citizen?
We don't detain children and separate them from their parents. Those parents have chosen
You're telling me
to
under
keep their
oath
child
right now.
with
Hold on.
them.
I just want to be clear. You're telling me under oath right now that your agency has not detained American children.
Those parents have chosen to keep their children with them. We don't separate families
So-
like the
so,
Biden
hold on.
administration
Let me
did.
continue.
We keep them
Let me-
together, and parents have
please
the
let me
option
continue.
on if they want their child with them
How long
or
do
not with them.
detentions last when you detain an American citizen? How long do they last?
We don't detain American citizens, and if there's
well,
probable cause.
Let me give you, because you are not speaking truthfully under oath. Isaiah Pena Salcedo, a U.S. citizen living in California, was detained more than 70 hours, almost 3 days, even after he showed ICE agents his passport. My colleague, Senator Blumenthal, gave you example after example. He brought people here who had something else we Americans consider sacrosanct, our home, our property. Your masked agents jumping out of unmarked cars have broken into, considerable property damage occurring, into American citizens' homes. Case after case of this, and you sit here before me and claim the buck stops with you, but you don't even know the names of these individuals. I ran New Jersey's largest municipal police department. When my officers engaged in misconduct, you can be damn well sure I knew about it and I investigated it. And yet you have situations where your officers are violating the sanctity of people's homes, arresting and detaining them and holding their children. And you're acting as if you don't know about it and saying that under oath. Miramar Martinez, who is here right now, on her way to church, an American citizen going to church, not just to worship, but to donate clothing. Your officers shot her multiple times. The case was thrown out of court, and you represent here that you don't know about it. In New Jersey, are you aware of your officers' activities in places like schools? Are you aware of your officers' activities at our public schools?
Sir, we don't go into schools and do targeted law enforcement operations. We do targeted law enforcement operations like other agencies
So
and
you're
law
telling me that
enforcement
ICE
do.
officers entered the grounds of a high school in Minneapolis? That's a fact. Elementary school children in New Jersey are terrified of your agents. When they came upon a school bus stop, they fled. Another school, a higher education, Columbia University, your agents reportedly lied to students, told them they were searching for a missing person to gain access to private spaces, to non-public areas of campus. Secretary Noem, these are kids. They're terrified in our communities. How do you think that affects them when children in my state go running, fleeing, and often you all pursue children, throwing them to the ground, getting on their backs, putting them in handcuffs? I want to talk to you about this incredible empire of for-profit companies that are profiting at rates we've never seen, and the way you're using money. Let's drill down on the warehouses that DHS has been buying over the last several months, totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. Are you familiar with the acquisition of a warehouse DHS recently bought in Roxbury Township, New Jersey?
Yes.
You are familiar with that?
I'm
Do you
familiar
know
that
how
it's...
much you spent for it?
No, sir, I do not.
$129.3 million. Do you know how much it was assessed for in New Jersey?
Sir, we're purchasing centers across the country to build efficiency into our detention system.
Efficiency to
so that
me,
we
as a
can...
person who's run tight budgets before and had taxpayer dollars, you paid $129.3 million for a facility in my state that was assessed at less than half of that, at $62 million. To work for a president that says he's a great deal maker, I can't believe he thinks that you're a great deal maker. But what's worse than that is that the Roxbury Township Council, comprised entirely of Republicans, voted unanimously earlier this year to oppose that facility. My office tried to facilitate a meeting between DHS and local officials so that ICE could hear their concerns, yet DHS did not even respond. That is unacceptable, that you all would enter a town. You wouldn't even follow environmental reviews or have conversations with local officials about the resources, from emergency resources to fire resources and more, that you're going to pull down. You didn't even have a conversation. Secretary Noem, do you comply with court orders?
Yes, we do comply
Your
with
agency
court
complies
orders.
with court orders.
Yes, we
That-
comply
that
with federal
again,
court
you were
orders.
saying under oath that you do, and yet we know in January the chief judge, Republican appointed for the Federal District of Minnesota, found that ICE had violated nearly 100 court orders since January 1st alone. In my state of New Jersey, last month, the chief of staff to Deputy Attorney General admitted in my state that in the New Jersey District Court that the government had violated 52 separate court orders, all involving cases where immigrants successfully challenged the legality of their detention. So this, again, is a constitution that you swore an oath to, and one of the most important ideals is that no one is above the law. You are violating the separation of powers, violating court orders, and routinely violating the civil rights of Americans. This is a reckless and out-of-control agency that you are responsible for. You seem to have no situational awareness whatsoever of some of the most egregious examples of Americans being completely attacked, violated, undermined in accordance with our laws by their own government. And this is what is phenomenal to me, is immigration was your president's #1 issue, overwhelmingly popular with the American people. But now it's overwhelmingly unpopular. And it's not because you are deporting dangerous people that everybody here wants out of our country. No, It's because you're going into our schools. You're terrorizing our children. You're detaining children. You're arresting Americans. You're breaking into our homes. You're terrorizing our streets. You're violating our rights to peacefully protest again and again and again.
None of
and then
that
when
is
a
true.
court tells you
None
to
of
stop,
that is true.
and then when a court
You are
tells you
trying
to stop,
to
you
impede us
violate
from
judges'
enforcing the law
orders. Not in
and
a
getting
partisan
dangerous
way,
criminals off of our
Republican-appointed
streets
and
so we don't have
Democratic
more
appointed.
families like the ones that are
Don't
sitting
sit
behind
there
me.
and tell me that
Lost
you are
their children, are
responsible
gone forever.
for the running of your agency when you're not even aware. Either you are utterly incompetent or you are violating laws with impunity. You should step down from your position. If you don't, you should be removed by this president. And if not, Congress should impeach you.
Yeah, I appreciate the
Lee.
encouragement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Noem, for being here. Just over a year ago, President Trump took office. At the time he did so, he came in with a significant mandate, or set of mandates. One of those mandates included the task of having to address a veritable tidal wave of illegal immigration that had occurred during the 4-year period between 2021 and 2025. A period of time in which an unknown number of people entered the United States borders unlawfully. Some have said it's maybe 10 or 15 million. Some have said it's more. It's difficult to ascertain. But what we do know is that many of those same people who were encouraging those things at that time are the same people who are now opposing President Trump and his efforts, and your efforts, and those of your department, to remove those individuals. That was part of his mandate, clean up the mess. Now, under ordinary circumstances, I would think that when there are laws of the United States that have been broken, most or all members of this body, if asked, should those who have violated the law in coming to our country be returned to their own countries, I would think we'd all be able to raise our hands in support of that. We had doubt cast on that last week during the President's State of the Union address, when President Trump made the point, quote, the first duty of the American government is to protect American citizens, not illegal aliens. He asked those of us who agreed with him to stand, and stunningly, a whole lot of my colleagues and a lot of our counterparts on the House of Representatives side declined to stand, refused to stand. These things are not without consequence. Illegal immigration is not something that poses no risk to the American people, to the security of the homeland, to the safety of individual families. It brings tremendous risk, and we've felt that. Some families represented here have felt that all too personally, and my heart goes out to each of them. We also face another threat as we approach another election this fall, a threat that, due to a ripple in existing federal law under the National Voter Registration Act, it's stunningly easy for someone in almost any state of the union to walk into a DMV, fill out a form to apply for a driver's license, which you can do as a non-citizen in almost any state. And by merely checking a box and signing your name, you can register to vote, including to vote in a federal election, even though existing law prohibits anyone who is not a citizen from voting in a U.S. federal election. It's phenomenally easy to do so if they follow this stunning formula. That's why I've proposed the Save America Act, which would make sure that we have the tools necessary to protect your vote. Because anytime someone casts a vote in a federal election who is not an American citizen, it's taking away your vote. It's taking something that doesn't belong to them and that belongs to you uniquely as an American citizen. Yet stunningly, some of the same people who were condemning you and condemning President Trump for trying to clean up the mess that President Biden created over a 4-year period of time are also the people most staunch, most dogged, most dug in their opposition to this very simple reform to make sure that those showing up to vote are entitled to vote. You know, you have to show your credentials in all sorts of circumstances, when boarding a plane, when applying for Social Security benefits, applying for a passport, when starting any new job for a new employer. You have to prove your identity, who you are, and that you're entitled to do that thing. You've got to demonstrate that you are entitled to do the thing that you're going to do. But It's not just government that requires these. When you pick up a prescription at a pharmacy, when you go to the doctor, when you're admitted to a hospital, when you board an airplane, when you pick up airplane tickets, when you go to the Super Bowl, the Emmys, the Grammys, the Oscars, or even the Democratic National Convention, where, yes, photo ID and credentials are required or you can't get in. You see, because the Democratic National Convention understands that when people participate at that event, who are not entitled to, they're taking something from someone else who does have that right, and that is wrong. Meanwhile, many of those same individuals who publicly cheered and advocated for President Biden as he was distorting various immigration laws, including the use of immigration parole, which requires an individualized determination in order to admit somebody into this country. President Biden used it categorically to bring in millions of people. With respect to our asylum laws, he just opened the floodgates and started treating people as if they were asylees just for having submitted an asylum application, then let them off into the interior of the United States saying, we hope one day you will show up to your immigration hearing where you'll have an individualized determination. And by the way, that immigration hearing might be many years or even decades into the future. So those same people who were applauding that are now condemning you and condemning President Trump for just trying to enforce the law. And those very same people today want your department, the entirety of it, to remain shut down, to remain defunded. Secretary Noem, tell me how that is affecting your operations within the department. Either your operations, your ability to protect the American homeland from those who have come here illegally or otherwise. How is that harming the families of those who work in your department? How is that harming the American people and undermining their safety?
Well, the patriots that work at the Department of Homeland Security still get up every day and do their jobs and work hard to protect the American people. There's individuals in some of our departments, though, that have been furloughed, that it's not an option for them to come in and they're not getting paychecks. They're not able to pay their rent, put food on the table for their kids. Our cybersecurity agency has lost hundreds of workers that have been furloughed. We've got weapons of mass destruction that does training for detecting bombs and terrorist activities across the country and works with our local law enforcement, has been furloughed and is not on duty today. We have ICE and CBP and officers at Secret Service and some Coast Guard elements that are still there and are essential employees that are showing up and doing their jobs, but their support staff isn't able to work and their contracting isn't getting done and their management practices aren't getting done and those families are struggling. Many of these TSOs at TSA that are running these security checkpoints are borrowing money so that they can get through a short period here without paychecks, but they just got through one of those and they're still in debt from paying the fines and penalties for late bills. So we are damaging families to make a political point, that the Democratic Party is damaging families long-term to make a political point when it has no effect on what we're able to do for immigration enforcement out there every single day because that agency is funded.
Now, you've heard from some of those same colleagues of mine today on this stand that they're negotiating, that they've made their offer, that they've made it fairly easy for us to fund your department with their conditions. Tell us about those conditions and how those would affect you.
Honestly, I don't understand what their conditions are at this point. One of the discussions that we had was body cameras. I've already instituted body cameras. They're being utilized on our law enforcement officers. They need to be funded. That is something that Congress has not given us the tools to do that. They talk about masks, yet they're the party that in 2020 mandated masks and penalized and put crimes on U.S. citizens if they didn't have a mask on. And now they don't want our law enforcement officers to be protected from doxing and from threats where people have threatened their families and come after them for just doing their jobs.
And that, to be sure, is why they don't want them wearing masks, right? They want to be able to dox them?
They want to be able to dox them and to dox their identities and have them be bullied, threatened, and potentially victimized by people out there who don't support them upholding the law.
Merely for doing their job.
Correct.
Doing their job, which means enforcing the law. Now, who in this room would not want the U.S. government doing its job enforcing the law and sending people back to their home country if they came here illegally? I can't imagine why somebody would not want that. It's stunning to me that particularly during a time like this, they'd want to carry out that kind of shutdown operation. Now, tell me this. Over the last few days, we've had a few new developments on the world stage and domestically with what happened over the weekend in Austin and with what happened on the other side of the world over the weekend. Tell me how that has uniquely intensified the effects of the now 2.5-week-old shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security, which has been shut down a couple of times now in the last 5 or 6 months.
We have known and suspected terrorists in this country that we don't know where they are. We have always faced threats here on our homeland, and that is our department's duty, is to do all that we can to protect the American people. But when we have conflicts overseas, we see that the ramifications are higher threats here at home as well. And more resources are needed to be out there to do due diligence, to try to do everything we can to prevent any kind of attack on our homeland against our American citizens.
If we're going to be a country and if we're going to be a safe country, we've got to fund the Department of Homeland Security. We should focus on nothing else until that's done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before I call on Senator Padilla, I expect DHS, just like any other executive branch agency, to comply with all lawful court orders. That's why we have an independent judiciary. All local and state law enforcement ought to support their federal law enforcement partners. Our laws need to be followed, even in instances where officials might disagree with them. We have this public safety issue because previous administration refused to enforce our immigration laws. The previous administration let millions of illegal immigrants without proper vetting and creating a humanitarian crisis at the border. President Trump and his administration have acted swiftly to address the crisis and with great success. Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Noem. I'm Senator Alex Padilla, the senior senator for the state of California. Last June, you were in Los Angeles when you publicly declared that the mission of DHS in Los Angeles was to liberate the people, not just of Los Angeles, but the state of California, from its duly elected leaders. The National Guard that was federalized and deployed into Los Angeles to assist DHS in this mission, that whole deployment was deemed unlawful, as I'm sure you are aware. Thankfully, those Guards members and the Marines who were also deployed to assist DHS in Los Angeles have also returned home and to their primary missions. Meanwhile, ICE and CBP are still conducting operations. My first question, the first of several yes or no questions, do you declare mission accomplished?
Senator Padilla, our mission is not accomplished until we get every single illegal criminal out of this country and protect American citizens, until we protect all of our children and these families behind me don't ever have to go through what they had to go through.
I'm trying to ask a question here. Thank you. Trump advisor Steve Bannon, among others close to President Trump, has called for ICE agents to, quote, surround the polls, unquote. However, your acting ICE director, Todd Lyons, has said, quote, there's no reason for us to deploy to a polling facility, unquote. And just last week, your Deputy Assistant Secretary for Election Integrity, Heather Honey, told a bipartisan group of state election officers on a call that ICE would not be present at polling places. I know this question came up earlier, but I have two specifics. One, which is it? Do you, Secretary Noem, agree with Steve Bannon, or your acting ICE director and your Deputy Assistant Secretary?
There are no plans to have ICE officers at polling locations. I'm not certain, Senator, if you're indicating that your party's planning on facilitating illegal aliens voting in our elections.
So I respect that you're saying there's no current plans, but obviously plans can change. No plans is the right answer, but not definitive enough. Sending ICE agents to the polls to intimidate voters is illegal. Yeah. And so I want to ask you explicitly, if President Trump or Stephen Miller directed you to do it anyway, with or without a bogus national emergency declaration, would you say no?
Sir, there is no plans to send ICE officers to
you say
polling
no?
locations, and
Would you
we're
say
not
no,
planning on
yes or
doing
no?
that. Are you planning on sending illegal aliens to vote?
No,
Is that
that's
what you're
already
planning
illegal
to do?
and extremely,
Yes,
extremely
but
rare.
people have done it
Now,
in the
it's amazing,
past, and
Mr.
that's
Chairman,
what,
that we even
but we are
have
not
to
going.
ask these questions because just a couple of weeks ago, Secretary Noem, when you visited Arizona, claimed that DHS has authority over certain aspects of elections. So enlighten me here. What statutory authority are you referring to?
The Department of Homeland Security has mitigation responsibility over critical infrastructure, and our election system is defined by statute as critical infrastructure. Therefore,
Critical
it's under our department to put forward and point out vulnerabilities that may
Trust me,
be
I'm very
in our
familiar
election
with the
systems, and then
specific role for
recommend mitigation.
CISA in elections as a former Secretary of State. Third area that I wanted to ask
I know
you,
that states
now,
run
the
elections.
nation
We
has
just point out
watched
vulnerabilities that
the
may
violent
exist
manner.
and,
Mr. Chairman,
and offer
trying to ask a question
mitigation.
here.
Okay.
So the nation has watched the violent manner in which many immigrants and citizens alike have been taken into custody by your officers and your agents. In addition to that, 32 people died while in ICE custody last year, and at least 8 more have died in the first 7 weeks of this year. The numbers are a big increase from prior years. Secretary Noem, yes or no, do you care enough about the human rights of the men, women, and children in your custody to improve the conditions as required by the courts?
Yes, absolutely. We adhere to our federal detention standards, which are higher than virtually all state and local detention standards. We provide medical care to all of our detainees, 3 nutritious meals a day. We take care of them.
Well,
We keep families together.
I appreciate the
We continue to
response,
do
but I
that.
have
You
to tell
talk
you
about
that I
when we
believe
have
my own
unfortunate
eyes.
situations where
And
individuals
I
have
believe
passed
my
away.
own eyes when I saw firsthand the poor conditions in which people were treated when I visited the detention center in California City. Now, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record reports from California-based and national non-governmental organizations, as well as the California Attorney General's Office, about the deplorable conditions at the California City Detention Facility and a recent court order requiring DHS to address these conditions, if I may, without. Thank you very much. Now, maintaining basic standards should not require court orders. The deplorable conditions at facilities across the country are the result of Secretary Noem's failed leadership. Now, since the beginning of the administration, federal judges have found DHS not in compliance with judicial directives on a number of immigration matters. The administration has lost in court on immigration cases more than 4,500 times since October alone, with judges across the country finding that DHS is detaining immigrants unlawfully. And judges appointed by both Republicans and Democrats across the country have threatened to hold the administration in contempt for failure to comply with court orders. This, too, is a result of Secretary Noem's failed leadership. Now, despite clear court orders, DHS continues to refuse members of Congress, including myself, access to detention facilities to conduct unannounced oversight. That's our job. This is yet another court order that DHS refuses to comply with, and another example of Secretary Noem's failed leadership. Meanwhile, the Department of Homeland Security has cut support and collaboration with state and local elections officials on election security. Secretary Noem has cut staff at CISA by a third. You've proposed cutting $500 million from the CISA budget. You talk about critical infrastructure, I know it well. And this is after having transferred $144 million from CISA to ICE last year for immigration enforcement. All this at a time when our country is more vulnerable to cyber attacks than ever. Another example of Kristi Noem's failed leadership. And now the department's also playing political games with the distribution of disaster aid, another sign of failed leadership. And on the topic of immigration enforcement, despite the DHS database that supposedly showcases the worst of the worst, a DHS spokesperson recently admitted that the database was full of inaccurate information. What we know is true, based on DHS's own data, is that less than 14% of those arrested by ICE and CBP have previously been charged with or convicted of violent crimes. Lies have become the pattern or practice of Kristi Noem's DHS. In the fall of last year, Secretary Noem asserted that no American citizens have been arrested or detained, despite more than 170 verified reports to the contrary. During a House Homeland Security Committee oversight hearing recently, Secretary Noem claimed that DHS had not deported veterans, not under this administration. And seconds later, Representative Magaziner presented via a video call Se-Jun Park, a veteran who earned a Purple Heart, but was deported by Secretary Noem's DHS. And so it comes as no surprise that not just the Secretary directly, but her representatives within the department have repeatedly lied to the American people about how the officers and agents under her charge have beaten, tased, shot at, and killed. Secretary Noem, before you even knew the facts or even allowed for a credible investigation to be conducted, you called Renee Good and Alex Preddy domestic terrorists for exercising their First Amendment rights. And just last week, DHS lied yet again about abandoning a Rohingya refugee, a nearly blind man who couldn't speak or understand English, in the parking lot of a closed coffee shop, only for him to die in the freezing streets of Buffalo. These are not accusations, colleagues. I submit for the record reports, declarations, other documents confirming these lies. For all these reasons and more, Secretary Noem, you should resign, or the president should fire you, or the House should vote to impeach.
Did you want those put in the record? Without objection. Secretary Noem, in